She's running around, so we'll probably make an appearance.
Yeah, somebody will give you like the whole like you'll miss these days speech, and you'll be like, yeah, whatever. It's like
Too
it's
soon.
legit true,
Too
but
soon.
it's legit true, but it's but that not really, because then like I'll have my granddaughters, like if I have them more than for a couple hours, I'm just like, oh wait, I thought I missed those days, but it's hard. Like
And then there's me over here that like in 4 weeks I'll be an empty nester, and I'm like, yes.
yeah, it's kind of exciting to think that. Okay, so any questions about stuff other than specific problems? Yeah, Jessica.
Yeah, so something you said a minute ago made me think of it, but do you have a graphic that shows, like, one of the first things on all of these exam reviews is know the new accounts and their classifications and normal balances since the last exam. So I feel like we've added every single chapter, but I haven't seen something. I'm going to drop it in the chat box.
Like a summary or something of new accounts. Each chapter would be helpful.
Yeah. So there's like for chapter 3, for example, this is what we had. I don't know if it's working. Oh, did you see it? It's a screenshot. I just sent it in the chat.
Yeah, I'm going to pull it up right now. What? It wants me to
and it just has like, it's just a graphic of like plus and minus of like where we put stuff. And that is so much more helpful to me to be able to see something like, okay, here's everything right here, you know? I was just wondering if there's anything like that with all the things, like
I'm like you,
every chapter.
There's every time it asks that same question, I'm like, well, did we learn anything new that has a new debit, credit, or balance? But it asks it for every chapter. So
right, so like you know, when you learn about allowance for doubtful accounts or allowance for bad debt expense or something like that, bad debt expense is like an expense. So you're like, okay, it has the same rules as other expenses, increases with debit, decrease with the credit. But then like the allowance account is like, well, what's that? Well, it's a contra asset, actually, right? Like it goes against your accounts receivable. And so I get what you're saying, that these things kind of get introduced in each chapter. It would be helpful to have
like just a visual to like
visual
study the visual
of these are the new accounts you're learning about. And I don't think the textbook material has anything like that. That'd be something I'd have to put together. It's a great idea.
Because like I think that
I'll have to think about putting something like that together.
Yeah, like they do a good job of giving us an example of a specific account, but it's like, for example, something that I do to study is I use the review that you have on the additional content or whatever, or no, I don't think it's on there. I think it's on just like the exam review. You download it and it has like the specific questions, and I put it in a Word document, and then I just copy and paste notes, or type in notes. And for that one, there's nothing easily copy and pastable, I guess.
Like, no, yeah, what you'd have to do is
hard.
Like look at the chapter and be like, what accounts are here that we haven't been dealing with in the right? It would be a process. Okay, yeah, I think
a little bit more in depth than I would prefer when I'm trying to do all the things like that. It just seems like it would be so nice to just have like a little graphic that I can study the graphic and like think in my mind, you know, especially because we're not taking notes. Like, I don't know, maybe this is just for me, like a visual learner, because I can remember things like that, things that I've like seen with my eyes.
It would be very helpful.
But it's too much when it's like broken down. I don't know. Anyway.
No, I appreciate
like you said,
that.
A summary would be helpful.
Okay.
But
yeah, so the way you think about the way they design the course is your first 4 chapters are like learning all these principles of accounting, and then after that they're like going deeper into like assets, like a specific type of asset. So they are introducing some new accounts that you haven't dealt with before. So having a summary of that would be valuable. So that's something I could try to put together in my spare time.
Are you not a bishop or anything, are you?
He's like, no, don't do that. But then I'm like, no, but I would really like it.
No, no, it's so what's great about teaching, you know, online is I teach the same exact class every semester. And so any ancillaries I create and add to my additional study resources, they carry forward. I don't have to recreate them. Does that make sense? And so I don't mind creating new stuff when someone gives an idea and it's a good one, because then it's going to benefit everybody going forward. I keep wondering if I should share a link to that, to that tutoring page that they have, like you see people from all the different classes. I don't know if any of you have looked at that.
I have. I've gotten help from there.
Yeah. I don't think it's a good replacement for having personal human tutors though. And I feel like they dropped the human tutors and did that. And I think it depends. Some people probably prefer that sort of learning, but I like to talk to people. Okay, that's a great one, Jessica. And the answer is no, I don't have it, but yes, it's something I will create.
So I have another question, just because you brought it up earlier about the final.
Jessica
Are we
has all
gonna?
the
I'm
questions.
sorry. I
I'm
didn't
just
have
kidding.
any
I know,
questions until
totally.
you started
You're
saying
totally
this.
good to ask.
You're
I
just
didn't come
asking
to
the
this
ones
meeting
that
Jessica
with
has
that.
good
asking,
questions though.
Jessica.
She's asking the
didn't-
questions we're thinking.
I didn't come with the questions. I just started thinking of them as you were talking. So no, I just was thinking about the final and what that would look like. Cause you said something about you don't need any of the ratios. So then that was like, oh my gosh, like, so what does the final look like? Are we gonna have like a final review, or is that something I should worry about now, or just wait until we get closer and
Can
then
you give
you'll
us a
talk to us
practice
about it?
final?
So that same exam checklist that you're talking about that has each of them listed, it has that for the final as well.
Oh, it does.
So
Okay.
it has exam 6 on there, which is the final.
Okay.
And that's where it says straight up, there's no ratio questions on the final.
Okay.
It might say there's no ratio questions except for the ones for this last chapter. I'm trying to remember it, but like they're not going to make you memorize all the ratios. Other textbooks actually handle ratios as a single chapter in the book, so that you spend that week or whatever just learning the ratios. I actually prefer this, where they introduce a couple each chapter that they think are applicable to the material. But anyway, so the short answer to your question is the final looks and feels just like all the other exams, except that it's comprehensive. So it's going to have like 5 questions from each chapter. And that study guide breaks it down just like it does for the other exams.
Do you think that our time is best used in the additional study content or on the Wiley Plus question and answer thing?
I think it depends on the student. And what I mean by that is some people really find a lot of value in like Orion as an example. Others feel like they use it and it doesn't do much for them. Some people really feel like the self-study questions or the self-tests in the additional study content are really valuable to them, because the feedback I keep getting is that it feels more like the test questions and sounds like them. And so just going through those and sort of making notes on the way it is helps them prepare for the exam. So I'm saying a lot to tell you I don't have a specific answer for you. By this point, you've probably learned what's most beneficial to you. And what I would say is your preparation for the final, if you're doing well or moderately well on the exams, then you'd probably be best served by preparing for the final in the same way you've been preparing for the exams. That's my thought. What I've found is that people typically score on like if I take your exam average, people typically are plus or minus about 5%, 5 or 6% on their final. Like they score about the same on the final as they do on their other exams.
Okay.
And you did say that the final is very similar to that pre-test that we all took at the very beginning. Is that correct? Because that was pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I don't think I said that.
Okay, I read it somewhere that it was very similar to.
But I would say like that's not totally inaccurate either. Like it's the only purpose for those pre-tests is so that we have data in place to say somebody understood, had this much comprehension before they started the class, and then we use the final to compare against it, right? So to say, okay, they're scoring better on the final than they were at the beginning, that means they learned something, which I mean, I would hope so. But for one thing, you studied as opposed to just took it cold. Jessica, you have any more questions? Did anything I said in that last sentence make you think of
I want to.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's
I don't
exactly
mean to make you
what
feel.
just
I do not mean to make you feel uncomfortable asking questions. I'm trying. I'm being flippant.
She just asked the questions that the rest of us are thinking about. That we just, she jumps in there and asks them. So
this happens to me at work all the time when I'll like question like administration about something, and then they'll be like, "Why is Mike being so negative?" And then like later after the meeting, people will be like, oh, those questions you asked, man, that's exactly. And I'm like, why didn't you back me up in the meeting? Why did
That's
you
why we're
leave me
backing her
out
up
to
now.
dry in front of the bosses and then later be like, thank you so much for asking that. So Jessica, thank you for
Okay, well,
asking
I
on
have a
behalf of
question.
Okay.
So we talked about that pre-assessment and it doesn't give us the answers. Like
No.
I got a
doesn't.
lot wrong. This is my first accounting class, so it was like really bad. And I was proud of myself for getting some right, to be honest. That's where I'm at. But it would kind of be interesting to know like what the answers are. But if we like, is this like the exams? Like we're not going to get the answers to that.
That's correct. I don't even have
Okay.
access on the pre-exam.
Darn. Okay.
No, again, as they redesign this course, that's something I'm bringing up is, you know, like right now at my full-time job, I teach a business statistics course, and I have this student who's like 2 chapters ahead of everybody, and she took her exam and she missed some questions, and she's like almost berating me online because she can't see the results of her exam. And I'm like, you're the only one that's taken it. I can't release results until everybody's taken the test. And she's just like, I do not like being kept blind. And I'm like, I get it. And so this is the biggest complaint we have about this class from students over and over is I'm getting no feedback. I take this exam, I get a grade as feedback, but I'd like to be able to look at it and see if there's a pattern in my knowledge gaps so that I can fill those in before, especially if I have a comprehensive final. And we keep giving that feedback and they're kind of going, but yes, but we have to protect the integrity of the exam. And I'm like, your exams are out there, man. Like I can go find our exams on websites right now. People are like, wait, which ones? How much does this cost?
I was like, wait,
I'm
what?
not telling.
Want to share those, Brother Fox?
Anyway, you know, that's the truth of it. And so
Especially
I'm
in a
really
class where
hoping that
some of
there's going to be a shift.
the questions are tricky.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Some of the questions are tricky in the wording, and it's like, oh, June, and it's like, oh wait, so I need to count like from June to December, not the whole year. You know what I mean? Like when it's trying to trick you, that's where I'm like, did they just trick me, or did I really not understand something?
And see, and I'm not as opposed to that as I am some other things, because the nature of accounting is attention to detail. And so forcing you to have to read something carefully and recognize, oh, I'm doing 3 months here instead of just a whole year or whatever. I really think that that's a skill that you need in accounting, because but what's hard is in real life, accounting in real life is easier than accounting in a class, because accounting in real life, you're doing it, you know what the problem is that you're trying to solve. You're actually setting the parameters of the problem, so to speak. Whereas here, it's all got to be written, so it's just a giant word problem. Anyway, yeah, no, I agree with you, Jessica. That's the bane of all accounting students ever throughout history, is like, you're just trying to trick me. I think, yes, and I'm succeeding.
It's okay. I like get it, and I've enjoyed your class. Like everyone said, you've been a really great like resource for us, so it's good. But I gotta ask the questions. So
yeah, and even if it is one of those, well, you need to pay better attention to detail. Great, I need to know that,
right?
So that I can go, okay,
right.
Were they purposefully being tricky, or was this one of those questions where I just didn't read it well enough?
Right.
Because
or
then I
do
know
I misunderstand the concept? Right. So I really need to go back and learn the concept. Or is it that I do understand the concept and I just missed a thing, and now I know to be more careful what I'm looking for?
Or like my math was wrong because I didn't type a number in my calculator. That has happened to me so many times on the homework, and it's so frustrating. I'm like, that's so dumb. I wasted a whole like try on forgetting a zero or whatever. I don't know.
Well, the good news is in the accounting world, if you make lots of errors with your calculator and stuff, then you don't have to worry about being an accountant anymore. So like, that's good.
I'm not
all students will be like, I was only off by 1 0, and I'm like, off by 1 0 means unemployed. Like, like you can't make constant errors if you're an accountant.
Just trying to graduate.
Not real. I mean, look, usually we have checks in place and we catch stuff, right? Like, everybody makes errors.
I love the assets and liabilities, because that was easy for me to know. Like, oh, I've got an error somewhere. Your
trial balance doesn't balance. You can go back and figure it out.
Exactly.
Okay. So,
Brother Fox, may I weigh in on one thing?
Sure.
under recognizing that I came in late to this conversation, and y'all may have already discussed this. If we're redesigning this course, my biggest difficulty is I have to pull down a drop down box and pick the account that it is going to, and I have to know all these accounts. And there's no place I can go that has all the accounts listed and what they're for, and whether they go under whether they're contra accounts or not, regular accounts, where they should fit. Yesterday in the homework assignment, there was one box. I just had to know it, and that particular account was nowhere in the homework that I had read. Understanding I had not yet read the entire chapter, if it was in the part that I have looked at, I missed it. But I got a red box twice because I didn't know the right wording to put in that box. And there was no place for me to go to look for it. I just had to know it. And so in the homework assignments, I'm missing things because it's not given to me.
Hi, honey.
I would say that's probably my, if I were to go and redesign the course, I would fix it so that we know what the different accounts are, and not have to just grasp them out of the ether,
Right.
or have them all memorized. But there's no list for me to memorize even, unless I make it myself.
Right.
I don't know if anyone else has experienced that.
I wonder if he's describing like what we were talking about at the beginning, that graphic of, knowing the normal balances and all the different accounts possible and where they fit in to,
Right.
like you said earlier, like it's an expense, so it fits under expense. Like, oh, I hadn't even thought of that. Like that seems
Right.
so simple, but
Well, and maybe, maybe the question
together.
is, what's keeping you, not speaking to you specifically, Jeff, but to the student, from keeping that list in their notes saying, these are all the accounts I've learned about thus far, and then each chapter saying, oh, I've learned about these accounts, and adding them in where they fit. So in a real world scenario, most businesses have what they call a chart of accounts, and it's like a single paper that says these are the accounts we use here. Because if I work with one employer, I'm going to call sales revenue, another place I'm just going to call it retail sales revenue, or like they'll have slightly different names for their accounts at different places. And so it's pretty normal to have a chart of accounts. If you're using QuickBooks, you can just go see chart of accounts, and it will show you all the accounts that get used at that business. And so that's another way that like classroom accounting is harder in some ways than real accounting, because in real accounting, most businesses have a limited number of accounts that they use. That's just the accounts they use. I will say right now, these systems like Wiley Plus are better than when I started teaching, where instead of drop-down boxes, it was like, here's a blank piece of paper, right? Create an income statement. And it was like, then you didn't even have the framework of it. And so those are improvements, and the drop-down's an improvement in that it limits the number of options there. But back to what Jessica was talking about at the beginning, if we could have some sort of a summary each chapter that says, these are the new accounts that we're dealing with this chapter we haven't dealt with before, some sort of an infographic or a figure that says, here's the new ones and here's their normal balances, here's what type of account they are, that would be really helpful. And so that's something I think I'll work on building.
At the bottom, sometimes at the bottom of the homework question, there's a button you can click, and it's like a chart of accounts. Was that helpful at all, or was it just nonsense? Because sometimes it lists everything that you've ever seen and stuff you've never
Sometimes
seen.
it is, and sometimes it's not. The particular assignment I was looking at, there was no chart of accounts. It was just,
Oh, it didn't have it listed.
I needed to know it.
Because I haven't gotten there yet. I hate to say I'm a little behind this week due to just life, because it happens.
Well, it's good to have some company. Thank you.
No, I appreciate your comments, Jeff. I don't disagree with you. That's hard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to learn, like when my wife is telling me about like a hard thing she's dealing with, to just be like, that must be really hard. Instead of being like, let me fix that for you, like that. And then coming up with some fix that doesn't even fix it. Like,
We'll let you fix it.
well, no, like you have to acknowledge and then fix. But I just be like, I just go to try to fix it. And then, yeah, like try doing that in ward council. And then it's like always the primary presence just looking at you like I can handle it. I just needed your go ahead, like, or whatever. Okay. All right.
Women can be so frustrating.
was a good
We want to
example.
complain, but we just want you
it's
to
not
listen.
frustrating. It's powerful and meaningful to recognize that when you're doing things like that, when you're mansplaining and someone calls you on it and you're like, I didn't mean to be mansplaining. I was just trying to help, or whatever.
See, I was acknowledging your frustration.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm acknowledging your acknowledgement of my frustration. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Let me find what I'm sharing first. I thought I had it open. Hold on a second. Talking so much, I don't even have the stuff open I should have open. Let's see.
That must be hard.
What's that? Are you acknowledging me? Thank you. I'm a little dense. I don't always get it. Okay, let's see.
I will echo, this is a good class. I'm struggling, but I'm learning, and I appreciate that.
Why is this being difficult? Sorry.
Are you sure you don't want to teach the statistics class for UIUI?
I do not want to teach that.
Oh.
Yeah, I have to take that.
Do you know who
Me
teaches it?
too.
I don't know. I got the plugin that somebody recommended last week to see the ratings of teachers, and so that's helpful. But my
Take
husband's
Brother
deployed.
Parkinson.
Brother who?
Parkinson.
That's what I've
Okay.
heard.
I'm waiting for my husband to come back from deployment because he is a math guy, so I'll need his help.
There you go.
But yeah,
We can use all the help we
Taking
can
it
get,
yet.
huh, Jessica?
Mhm.
When did your husband get back?
not until May, so I
And how
won't
long
be
has he
taking
been
it
gone?
next semester. The end of October, so it's like a 6-month deployment. But
6 months. Those are easy deployments.
yeah,
I'm joking, Jessica. I'll tell you something. Like, so at least when I got deployed, when I was in the military, it's way easier on the military member than it is on the spouse. At least that was my experience. Even when we're doing pretty horrific things, I'm picturing my wife at home dealing with the kids, dealing with life. And like, even when you're in a combat area, it's not like you're fighting combat 24/7. You're going and you're doing hard things, and then you get like lots of bro time, I guess would be the best way of putting it. Like you get to go to the gym together, mess around together, and you feel almost guilty because you're kind of having like time with your buddies while your wife's home with the kids.
yeah,
and
it's very much like a selfish lifestyle in a way. You only have to worry about yourself, doing good at your job. My husband pretty much is going to the gym twice a day, and I'm like,
playing
must be
Xbox.
nice to not have to not have that many responsibilities to be able to go to the gym twice a day. But it's fine. It keeps him busy. I want him to be busy, so that's
Well,
good.
yeah, you need to be busy because it keeps your job off, your mind off of the rest of the job, which isn't always a pleasant job. Anyway, so yeah, just know from a ex-military member, know how much we appreciate the moms at home and what they're doing. It's hard, and we know it is. And I'm sorry I got emotional, but I just, my wife with 8 kids, every deployment I had, I realized what a stress that was on her. So thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
I appreciate that.
Sorry for becoming emotional. What a wuss. Anyway,
Aww.
so
Cute.
let's talk about something way more exciting, way sexier than anything you've ever talked about, which is depreciation. So recognize that depreciation, in our mind, we tend to think of depreciation as telling us what an asset is worth, but it's not really that. What we're doing with depreciation is we are allocating or spreading the cost of the asset out over its life. For example, they got a picture of a truck here. If we buy a truck for $30,000 and we take the whole cost of that truck as an expense, right when we buy it, we're going to have this huge expense in year one. Then we're going to have like no expense in the following years, even though we're using the asset to generate revenue. So the idea is, if we're going to use an asset to generate revenue or to help in generating revenue over a certain amount of time, we should spread the expense of that asset out over the same period of time in which we're earning revenue. And so depreciation is the means by which we spread that cost out over the asset's useful life. So the factors involved then in depreciation are the cost of the asset, its useful life, and then a salvage value, any money we think we're going to get out of the asset at the end of its useful life. For some companies, salvage value is a really big issue. Think of someone like Enterprise Rent-A-Car. They only keep those vehicles up until they're, if you were to buy a car that had been used as a rental car, it would probably still only have like 30,000 miles on it. They move through them pretty quickly. So they have a significant salvage value. So anyway, so those are the factors in computing depreciation. So so the chapter, and if you started the work in it, let me see, someone hit something in the chat there.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Oh, okay, I just want to make sure I was answering a question.
By the way, I understand depreciation better. It seems like the declining balance method explains my body and life. I'm not sure if I will have salvageability at the end, but I understand depreciation just thinking of my body.
Right. Well, luckily for us, we're on like the factory refurbished plan, right? Like at some point we'll be renewed, and we'll be better than at the beginning, I guess. Anyway, yeah, I think I'm on the double declining balance as well. I'm losing value faster than it appears I have years. So okay, so 3 different types: the straight line method, the declining balance method, and then units of activity. I will say that, like, and this little chart shows it, almost everybody uses straight line because the IRS has made it super easy to do so. They have these schedules, they're called MACRS, M-A-C-R-S schedules. And in essence, you just say, what type of asset am I depreciating? Like for my business, a storage business, we have non-residential rental real estate is the type of asset that I have. It gives me a set amount of like a life. And so if I just follow that IRS schedule, then I don't ever have to worry about in an audit anybody questioning my method, because I'm using exactly the schedule the IRS gave. And those are always straight line. And so that's why most businesses use straight line, is because the IRS has made these maker schedules that people just use. Anyway, so here's an example. Bill's Pizzas, it's plural, purchased a small delivery truck January 1st, 2017, had a cost of $13,000, expected salvage value of $1,000, estimated useful life of 5 years, estimated useful life in miles of 100,000. So compute the depreciation using these 3 different methodologies. So in the straight line method, the first thing we want to do is calculate our depreciable costs. Our depreciable cost is our cost minus our salvage value. In other words, that's the amount of the cost that we're going to depreciate over the asset's useful life. That's what we mean by depreciable cost. And then we just divide depreciable cost by useful life, and that gives us an amount of depreciation per year. If we're doing partial years, then we would just divide that depreciation expense by 12, and that would be the depreciation per month. Okay. So here's a little bit of a, I guess you'd call it a depreciation schedule. And you can see whenever we're doing the straight line method, what we're doing is we're just taking some percentage, I guess you'd call it, of the depreciable cost each year. And it's a fixed percentage. So if you think about it, when you say you divide something by 5, 1/5 is 20%, right? If we were depreciating something over 4 years, we'd say we'd be depreciating it at a rate of 24%, I mean 25% each year. If you're depreciating something over 10 years, you'd be depreciating it at a rate of 10% per year, 10% of that depreciable cost. Anyway, so here's the schedule. We have our depreciation cost times the rate gives us our annual expense. At the end of the first year, we'll have accumulated depreciation of $2,400, and our book value will be our cost minus our accumulated depreciation. And you'll notice that the book value is the full cost, not the depreciable cost, but the full cost of $13,000 in the case of this asset, minus accumulated depreciation. Each year, we would do this adjusting entry at the end of the year, this adjusting entry to recognize the depreciation expense for the year, and then charge that to accumulated depreciation. Anybody have a guess what type of account accumulated depreciation is? Because depreciation expense is an expense, right? So that helps when it has it in its name. So accumulated depreciation is a contra asset account. And remember, with contra accounts, they have normal balances on the opposite side of the account as the normal account. So like an asset account usually has a normal balance of a debit. So a contra asset is going to have a normal balance of a credit. And then a contra account is always linked to a specific account. So accumulated depreciation will be linked to the asset account that we're depreciating. Okay, so that's the straight line method. So the second is the declining balance method. I guess I skipped that. So the declining balance method is an accelerated method, meaning that we are depreciating it faster. More of the asset in the first, or more of the assets cost in the early years than in the later years. We do this sometimes because that's how a lot of assets are, right? When you buy a car and you drive it off the lot, you're never going to sell it back for what you paid for it. So the idea is we've used up some of its value, some of its cost, or a larger amount of its cost up front, and then it will decline as we go on. So the most common form of declining balance method is what's called the double declining balance. But you can do 1.5 times declining balance, anything like that. So let me give you an example of how it works. So when we're using the declining balance method, what we're going to do is first we have to figure out our declining balance rate. And the way we do that is to figure out our straight line rate. And to find the straight line rate, what you do is you take 1 divided by the number of years in the useful life of the asset. Okay, so a 5-year asset, 1 over 5 is going to equal 0.2 or 20%. So in double declining balance, then what we do is we double that rate. 20% doubles to 40%. Now, unlike the straight line balance, where what we were doing is applying that percentage, the straight line method, where we were doing this, we figured out our rate. It was a 5-year asset, so 1 over 5 was 20%. We're applying that to the depreciable cost each year. So unlike that, in the declining balance method, what we're going to do is we're going to find our rate, which is double the straight line rate, and we're going to apply it to our book value each year. So the amount of depreciation expense is actually going to be highest in the first year and then decline year after year. With the declining balance method, we don't worry about the depreciable cost up front. Okay, so we don't do the cost minus the salvage value. Instead, we work with book value. So in the first year, the book value is the total cost. Multiply it by its rate. That gives us a depreciation expense. And so our accumulated depreciation that first year is going to be the total amount we depreciated that year. And our book value will be the beginning book value minus any accumulated depreciation. Then the next year, we're going to carry that book value forward. That's our beginning book value. Multiply that by the rate to figure out our depreciation expense. And then our accumulated depreciation will be any depreciation from last year plus this year's depreciation. And then our book value will be the beginning book value minus the accumulated depreciation.
So is there a typo there? Because the book value in 2017 is 7,600, and you said that carries over to the beginning book value of 2018.
Ooh, yeah, it does look like there's a typo, huh? Yes.
Okay, just checking.
Thank you. Yeah.
Nice attention to detail.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, I'll blame that on Wiley.
Mhm.
All right, so then we have 4680, multiply it by 40%. That gives us the depreciation expense for that year. Add any accumulated depreciation from last 2 years, plus this year's to give us the accumulated depreciation for 2019. And then the book value is 13,000 minus 10,192, which is 2,808. That carries forward to 40%, etc. Where at the end, this last year, if you remember, we want to have an ending book value of $1,000 because that's going to be our salvage value. So in the last year, rather than applying the whole formula, we just depreciate enough to be left with a book value of our salvage value. So with the declining balance method, you're going to have a depreciation expense that is higher in the first year, and then it is dropping each year. At the end of the asset's useful life, our intent is to have our book value equal the salvage value. That's different than in the straight line method, where we're going to have the same amount of expense each year over the asset's life. Hold on, sorry. I feel like we got somewhere weird. We'll have the same amount of depreciation each year over the asset's useful life, but still at the end, we still want a book value equal to the salvage value. Okay, so that's going to be the same. It really just comes down to how much are we depreciating each year? Is it a consistent amount, or is it a declining balance where we do more in the beginning and less as we move forward?
Brother Fox?
Yeah.
Did you say that we can kind of choose what declining balance rate is? We can choose, you said 1.5 instead of 2 times.
Yeah, so
30% each, or we could do more.
Yeah, so not in a given problem, you wouldn't choose that. It will tell you this company uses the double declining balance method, or this company uses a 1.5 times declining balance method, which would be like to take the straight line and multiply it by 1.5. So in this case, it would be like 30%. So you don't choose that as much as companies will choose what rate what factor, I guess, they're gonna multiply by the straight line rate to choose their declining balance rate. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Ish. All right. The last method, the units of activity method. I think most of us recognize that some assets, maybe years isn't the best way to figure out how much of it we've used up, but instead some sort of unit of activity. In the case of cars, maybe the miles it's driven. In the case of a lot of equipment, it might be the hours that the equipment is run or the number of units it's actually produced if it's like a manufacturing equipment. So this is very much like straight line. We start with we find our depreciable cost, which is our cost minus salvage value, and then divide that, instead of by the life in years, we divide it by the total units of activity in its life. So let's say this company's decided that they think that this delivery truck has a useful life of 100,000 miles. So that gives them this depreciation rate of 12 cents per mile. Then you just apply that each year and saying, okay, this year it was driven 15,000 miles, so I take 12 cents per mile. I'm going to depreciate $1,800 this year. So in the units of activity method, it's going to all be dependent on the number of miles driven by that truck in that given year. That will drive the amount of depreciation expense. And then again, the amount of expense we have this year in the first year becomes our accumulated depreciation. Our book value is our cost minus accumulated depreciation always. In the second year, they have 3,600, so accumulated depreciation will be the 1,800 from last year plus the 3,600 we're depreciating this year will be 5,400, and the book value will be the cost minus it, etc. You'll notice that in each of these cases, regardless of the methodology you use to figure out your depreciation, your journal entry is always going to be a debit to depreciation expense and a credit to accumulated depreciation, always. That's what and if you think about it, depreciation is a form of adjusting entry, right? We get to the end of the year and we say, using that equipment for this year involves some expense to me. Some portion of that equipment's cost needs to be recognized as an expense. So I'm going to use an adjusting entry to record that expense. And so all this chapter is saying, this is something we do at the end of the year. We figure out how much an asset was, how much of its cost was applied to this year. And these are 3 different methods people use for dividing that cost out, okay? But the journal entry is always the same: depreciation expense on the debit, accumulated depreciation on the credit. And so the IRS says, even though they give us this straight line method that they use with the MACRS schedules, they say that businesses are free to choose what depreciation method they want, so long as they're consistent and they are justifiable. So if you're in an audit and you say, well, we chose a double declining balance method because the nature of our equipment is it gets used up more in the first, in the early years of its life, that would be fine. What they don't want you is arbitrarily changing when you think it will benefit your business to change the methodology. And that's why most just use the straight line, because you can't really ever be, I guess, accused of doing something arbitrarily if you use the IRS's own schedule. All right. But you can see in each of these, there's a fair amount of variance. And remember, if you have more expense, because this is going to be depreciation expense in a given year, then that lowers your net income for that year, and that lowers your tax liability for that year. And so, like, the person using declining balance, all other things being equal, it is going to have a lower net income in this year than the other models would provide. And so that's why they want you to be consistent and not try to hop around. And, some businesses want to maximize net income because they're trying to impress investors or somebody else. Others want to minimize net income so that they're minimizing tax exposure, right? It just depends on the goals of what you're trying to do a lot of times.
So is that the reason you would choose one, is simply tax purposes, or are there other reasons as well?
So I honestly think, like, my advice if I'm working with a client is choose the methodology that best reflects how you're using the asset. That's the most justifiable if you're ever audited. So to say, like, I'm using units of activity because, if your policy is to say buy vehicles and then auction them when they reach 100,000 miles, well, you've already sort of delineated in your policy that miles are the means by which you replace vehicles. Does that make sense? And so it'd be very easy to justify that in an audit scenario to say, no, we track all vehicles by miles, we auction them off once we hit 100,000 miles. And so it just makes the most sense for us to expense them according to the mileage used. So the short answer is I would use the methodology that most closely matches how you deal with the asset in real life. Probably even a better piece of advice would be like, just use straight line. That way you don't have to deal with, use the MACRS schedule and it's easy. That's probably what most accountants would tell you. That was a really long answer to a short question. Sorry, Jessica. So that's that. Anyway, all right. I don't know, did that precipitate other questions?
I feel like our homework or maybe not so much homework, but our, like, the self-assessment test really focused a lot on straight line. If we grasp that really well, would you suggest that we practice the other one like a lot, or just really grasp the straight line?
So I think if you grasp straight line conceptually, then you'll also grasp units of production or units of what did they call it in this book? Units of activity method, because honestly, they're pretty identical, except that one is based on time and the other is based on some other factor, right? Like the unit, whatever that is. So I think like those two are conceptually the same. Declining balance.
Yeah, the declining balance one is like, I haven't tested myself with that one as much.
Yeah, you need to know it well enough to be able to do it. It's going to be on the exam.
Okay.
But you're right, straight line, appropriately, right? They're focusing on that because most businesses use that. But they'll put declining balance in there just because it's hard. So to try to get you on it, I think, for lack of a better.
And they tell us in the problem, like at which rate or percentage or whatever, right?
Yeah,
like that's not something we figure out.
Correct. Like you mean like if it's doing double declining balance? In fact, I think
Yeah.
for this book, everything is double declining. I don't think they even introduced the idea of some other declining balance rate different than double the straight line rate.
Okay, then that's fairly easy, right? Like
Yeah, no, it's really doable. Like,
okay.
To me, I just set up an Excel spreadsheet, honestly, and you know, if you feel comfortable with Excel, because then you can sort of, if you think about like, you know, if I have these columns, beginning book balance, my rate, I just know that this equals this times this, and then this equals this, and then this equals the accumulated appreciation minus the beginning book value. And then I can just sort of like fill it all, and it's pretty manageable if you're comfortable with Excel. If you're not, then you just have to like build this by hand, right? With a calculator, and that's more time consuming.
So learn to love Excel.
I love Excel. I mean, I will get nearly as emotional talking about it as I do about military spouses. Okay, like it's really close. Like I always say, I wish I wish dating could be something that we could handle on Excel, because or that, you know, I tell my wife I wish women were like Excel. You know, like if I have a consistent input, I can expect a consistent output. But my wife is not always that consistent. But Excel never lets me down. As long as I put my formula in right, I can trust the output. I've always like picturing like somebody like in the movie theater, right? Like they look over at the girl and they're like, is now the time to move in, you know? And then they could like just pull out a calculator and be like, now's the time, right? Like, but it's just not that consistent. You can't always read the vibes. It's fun to watch my boys go through dating, and my daughters too, but for some reason it's a little scarier for me when it's my daughters, which I know is misogynistic, and yet it's still there in me, protective of those girls. I don't know, it's the world we live in, I guess. All right,
it's a different set of lecture. It's a different lecture entirely.
Kind of though, right? Because the others, you know, to make this assumption that somehow she's a potential victim and he's a potential perpetrator is horrible. And you know what I'm saying? And yet, I do. It's that, you know, what I really want is for all of my children to be decent people, right? To not see other people as objects, but to be when they're on a date, to really be there to get to know a person and understand themselves and the sort of person they might want to be with forever. And yet there I'm like, are you sure you want to wear those shorts when you're going to the movies? Because you're just going to be
the end goal is always the same. But when I have a son who I've adopted, and when I talk to him, I'm like, behave yourself and remember who she is. But when my girls go out on a date, I say, remember who you are and protect yourself. Here's the pepper spray. I don't know why it's different for them, but it always is.
Yeah, well, yeah, anyway. Deep-seated biases in our culture or something. Or maybe deep-seated biases in the nature of
parenthood or
humanity, you know.
Something.
Okay, anyway. So totally off topic. Any homework problems we want to look at
I would say this as a dad.
What's that, Jeff?
I'm feeling protective of my daughters. I'm there to protect my daughters, and I can't always trust that some other guy is going to do that. I'm the dad to protect them. With my son, however, I'm always teaching him that he's supposed to protect women. And that includes his sisters and the ladies he dates. And so I look at it as more of who's the protector. And so it's not, I don't necessarily look at it as my daughters are potential victims. Rather, I'm their protector, and my son should be protecting his dates.
Yeah.
In fact, there was a conference talk. I can't remember who gave it. It might have been a BY devotional. I might look this up to share, but there was someone going around at BYU at one point in Provo, not Idaho, because Idaho is better. And they were using a gun to threaten the guy so they could take the lady and do dastardly things. And this general authority said, if the man that's on that date is not willing to lay down his life for his date, he's in error, which I thought was pretty strong. But that general authority was probably a dad of daughters.
But I am trying as a father and as a bishop, when I talk with young women, to say, you know, you're responsible. Both people in a party, you know, both people in a date are responsible for themselves and their choices, but also can be there to strengthen and lift and help the other one. You know, like, so I'm not denying my natural feelings of protection for my daughters, but I also want them to look out for the interest of that guy, right? And say, like, you know, both of you have an interest in the other when you're there on a date together, and you're not objects. You're people, and you're there to strengthen and lift one another. And at least I found in my relationships that there's times when I'm weak and she's strong, and there's times when it's the opposite, and we both need to in some ways safeguard the other. You see that in marriage, right? There's times when each of you needs the other to say, like, no, you don't, you know, we probably shouldn't be doing this or whatever. Anyway, no, good talk. We should get on tangents, don't we?
It does apply to accounting. There will be some balances that are in errors, and right. Some that are in not arrears, but some that are in, yeah, anyway.
And maybe reconciliation comes into this too, huh? Any specific question, like homework problems that we want to look at? Sorry, my phone's ringing. Straight to voicemail with you. Nobody? We're good? Okay. Then great. Again, I apologize for being late, and apologize for the tangents a little, although sometimes they're fun. And Jessica, I legitimately appreciate your questions. Okay, I'm sorry if
Me too.
I do not mean to make you feel bad for asking you. I was just teasing.
Yeah, no, I just worry that I'm annoying, but
not at all.
Doesn't sound like I am, so I'm gonna keep going.
You don't seem that annoying to me, but like, but I don't really know you either. So I mean, it's possible that you are. I just don't think you are like that. You seem pretty awesome. Okay, that's what I'm saying.
We're more than halfway done, so not too much longer. You'll be done with me.
Yeah, no, and I this has been a great group, honestly. Like, I wish I taught accounting too, just so that I could like we could do this again next semester, but that's not BYU's model. Their model is to kind of have us just specialize on one class. So that's what we do. All right. Well, then we can end with a prayer. I think Michelle started us, so who's willing? I mean, I guess Michelle
I'll say it.
Closing too, but it'd be nice to, you know, mix it up.
Father in heaven, we're so grateful for the opportunity we've had to meet and discuss the things for this week, and we're so thankful for Brother Fox and the time that he puts in to help us. We're especially grateful, Father, for technology, which allows us to be able to meet together, and we're thankful, Father, for the gospel in our lives and for those who spend their time in our behalf. We're grateful, Father, for a living prophet and for his guidance and counsel. We are especially grateful, Father, for those men and women who put their lives on the line each day, and for their families and for their support, and help them to know that we love and support them. We say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I have a
you.
brother that's deployed too, so,
We're all just.
and he's got
emotional
6
wrecks
kids.
today. All right. Thank
Appreciate
you.
that. Thanks.
Bye
Bye,
bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.